Officer Jake had learned to sleep lightly during his 3 years stationed at the remote Alaskan outpost. The cabin sat 15 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but frozen wilderness and silence so deep it felt like being on another planet. Tonight, however, the silence had been shattered by the worst blizzard Alaska had seen in half a century. The Weather Service had issued dire warnings. Sea temperatures, winds exceeding 70 miles per hour, and visibility reduced to zero. This was the kind of cold that could kill an unprepared person in less than 10 minutes. Jake had spent the evening monitoring emergency channels, grateful that most residents had heeded the warnings to stay indoors. The cabin's walls groaned and creaked under the assault of Arctic winds. Ice crystals formed intricate patterns on the inside of the windows despite the roaring wood stove. He'd finally drifted off around midnight, exhausted from the day's preparations and welfare checks on the area's scattered residents. At exactly 2:47 a.m., Jake's eyes snapped open. Something had penetrated his dreamless sleep, a sound that didn't belong to the storm's furious symphony. He lay perfectly still in his bunk, breath held, straining to hear over the howling wind. There it was again, scratch, scratch, thud, a deliberate sound, rhythmic and purposeful, not the random scrape of wind-blown debris, but something with intention behind it. Jake's hand instinctively reached for the service weapon on his nightstand. His heart began to hammer in his chest. Who, or what, could possibly be outside in these conditions? The thermometer mounted outside his window read C, and that was before factoring in the wind chill that would make it feel closer to -70°C. At those temperatures, exposed skin would freeze solid in under 3 minutes. Frostbite would set in almost immediately. Scratch, scratch, thud. The sound came again, more insistent this time. Jake swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. He grabbed his thermal pants and pulled them on quickly, never taking his eyes off the front door. The scratching continued, maintaining that same eerie pattern, 3 scratches followed by a single heavy thud. It reminded him of someone knocking. No, not just knocking, but deliberately trying to get attention in a specific, unmistakable way. "This is insane," Jake muttered to himself, reaching for his heavy parka. His training kicked in as he ran through possibilities. A lost hiker, impossible, no one would be out in this. A bear, wrong season, and they didn't knock with such precision. An injured person seeking help, but how would anyone have made it this far from town in these conditions? Scratch, scratch, thud. The sound was growing weaker now, more desperate. Jake's professional instincts warred with his common sense. Opening that door meant exposing the cabin's precious heat to the killing cold outside. It meant putting himself at risk. But someone, or something, needed help badly enough to seek out his isolated outpost in the worst storm in decades. He grabbed his flashlight, checked his radio, and approached the door with the caution of a man who'd seen too many things go wrong in the wilderness. The frost on the inside of the door was so thick he couldn't see through the small window. His hand hesitated on the handle as another weak scratch came from outside, followed by a sound that made his blood run cold, a soft, almost human-like whimper. Jake's mind raced. In his 3 years at this posting, he'd dealt with all manner of wildlife, aggressive moose, curious bears, even a wolverine once. But this was different. This sound carried something he'd never heard from an animal before, a kind of desperate intelligence, a plea for help that transcended species. The scratching had stopped. In its place came only silence and the endless roar of the wind. "Hold on," Jake called out, not knowing if whatever was outside could even hear him through the thick wooden door. "I'm coming." He pulled on his insulated gloves, wrapped a scarf around his face, and gripped the handle. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his temples. Every horror movie he'd ever seen flashed through his mind, the foolish person opening the door to their doom. But Jake had taken an oath to protect and serve, and that oath didn't come with weather conditions attached. He turned the handle and pulled. The door exploded inward with a blast of wind and snow that momentarily blinded him. Ice crystals stung his exposed skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Jake raised his flashlight, and its beam cut through the swirling white chaos to illuminate a sight that would be burned into his memory forever. Standing in the knee-deep snow, covered in a thick layer of ice and frost, was a German Shepherd mix. But this wasn't a simple lost dog seeking shelter. The animal's dark brown eyes locked onto Jake's with an intensity that was almost human. Blood stained her frozen paws, leaving crimson prints in the pristine snow. Her body shook violently from hypothermia, ribs visible beneath her ice-matted fur. But what stopped Jake's breath wasn't her pitiful condition. It was what she did next. The dog didn't try to rush inside toward warmth. She didn't cower or beg. Instead, she held Jake's gaze for one long moment, then deliberately turned away from the safety of the cabin, took 3 measured steps into the howling blizzard, and looked back over her shoulder. Her meaning was unmistakable, primal, and urgent. "Follow me." Jake stood frozen in the doorway, understanding blooming in his chest like a flower of ice. This dog hadn't come seeking rescue for herself. She was seeking a rescuer for someone or something else. And she had chosen him. Jake had faced down armed suspects, talked people off ledges, and survived a car crash that should have killed him. But standing in that doorway, watching a half-frozen dog deliberately walk away from safety and warmth, he felt a fear unlike anything he'd experienced before. This wasn't the clean fear of physical danger. This was something deeper, more primal. This was the fear of making a choice that could cost lives. The German Shepherd took 3 more steps into the blizzard and stopped, her dark silhouette barely visible through the swirling snow. She turned her head back toward Jake, and even from 15 feet away he could see those eyes, intelligent, desperate, pleading. She barked once, a sharp sound that cut through the wind like a knife. It wasn't the bark of a frightened animal. It was a command, a demand, "Come with me, now." "You've got to be kidding me," Jake breathed, his words instantly snatched away by the howling wind. The logical part of his brain was screaming at him to close the door, radio for help, wait for daylight and better conditions. Going out into this storm was suicide. The temperature was lethal. Visibility was 0. He could get lost 30 feet from his own door and never find his way back. But the dog barked again, more urgently this time. Then she did something that shattered every last doubt in Jake's mind. She limped back toward him, her movements stiff and painful from the cold, and gently gripped the edge of his parka in her teeth. She tugged once, twice, 3 times. Then she released him and looked up into his face. In his entire life, Jake had never seen an expression like that on an animal. It wasn't just need or fear. It was communication. Pure, desperate communication from one intelligent being to another. Those brown eyes held a message as clear as spoken words. "I need you. Someone needs you. Please, please come." Jake made his decision in that instant. "All right, girl," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Give me 30 seconds." He rushed back inside, his mind working with the clarity that came from years of emergency training. He grabbed his emergency pack, the one he'd prepared for worst-case scenarios like this. Thermal blankets, first aid kit, chemical hand warmers, flares, emergency radio, rope, and high-calorie energy bars. He pulled on his heaviest winter gear, the parka rated for -60°C, insulated snow pants, his thickest gloves, goggles to protect his eyes from the wind-driven ice. He keyed his radio, knowing that if he was going to do something this reckless, someone needed to know. "To base. I'm responding to what appears to be an animal in distress outside my location. The animal is exhibiting unusual behavior, suggesting there may be additional victims requiring assistance. I'm venturing approximately." He paused, looking at the dog who was still waiting at the door. "Distance unknown. Will radio updates every 10 minutes. If you don't hear from me within the hour, send search and rescue to my last known position." The radio crackled back immediately. "Jake, negative. Those conditions are deadly. Wait for the storm to pass. That's an order." But Jake was already clicking off the radio and clipping it to his belt. Some orders weren't meant to be followed. Some moments required a person to trust their instincts over their training. He grabbed a length of rope and, in a moment of inspiration, fashioned a loose loop. He approached the dog carefully, speaking in low, calm tones. "I need you to trust me, girl. I can't lose you in this storm." To his amazement, the dog stood perfectly still as he slipped the rope gently around her neck, not tight, just enough to keep them connected. She seemed to understand that this tether was for both their safety. The moment the rope was secure, she turned and began to move forward with renewed urgency. Jake stepped out of the cabin and into hell. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Even through his heavy gear, he could feel the temperature trying to steal the warmth from his body. The wind was so powerful it nearly knocked him off his feet. Snow pelted his goggles, reducing visibility to mere feet. Within seconds, ice began forming on his scarf where his breath escaped. The dog moved forward with surprising confidence, despite her obvious injuries and exhaustion. She pulled against the rope, not hard but insistently, navigating through the storm as if following an invisible map. Jake had no choice but to trust her, placing his boots carefully in the deep snow, one step at a time. 5 minutes into their journey, Jake's fingers were already going numb despite his gloves. 10 minutes in, he'd lost all sense of direction. The world had become nothing but white noise and stinging cold. The only reality was the rope in his hand and the dark shape of the dog ahead of him, somehow pressing forward through conditions that should have stopped any living creature. The dog led him around a massive snowdrift, through what might have been a narrow alley between buildings. Jake couldn't tell anymore. She paused occasionally, always looking back to make sure he was still there, her ice-crusted face showing increasing desperation. Blood from her paws left a trail that was instantly erased by the falling snow. 15 minutes. Jake's emergency radio crackled with increasingly frantic calls that he ignored. His legs burned from pushing through the deep snow. His lungs ached from breathing the Arctic air. But the dog never stopped, never hesitated. She had a destination, a purpose that drove her beyond the limits of normal endurance. 20 minutes into their journey, Jake stumbled and fell. His gloved hands plunged into snow so cold it burned. For a moment, he wanted to just lie there to rest, to give up. Hypothermia was like that. It made you want to sleep, to surrender. But then he felt something warm and wet on his face. The dog was licking him, whining frantically, pawing at his shoulder. Those eyes were inches from his own now, and what he saw in them gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. He saw a mother's love, a mother's desperation, a mother's absolute refusal to give up. Jake forced himself to his feet. "I'm with you, girl, all the way." The dog turned and pulled forward with renewed vigor. And then, through the swirling snow, Jake saw it, the skeletal outline of an abandoned industrial building, its metal frame barely standing against the storm. The dog squeezed through a gap in the collapsed wall and disappeared into darkness. From inside came a sound that made Jake's heart stop, the high-pitched, weak crying of puppies on the edge of death. Jake's flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the abandoned building, revealing a scene of industrial decay that made his skin crawl. Rusted machinery loomed like sleeping monsters. Collapsed beams created a maze of twisted metal. The wind howled through gaps in the walls, creating an eerie whistling that sounded almost like screaming. But beneath all of that, Jake could still hear it, the weak, desperate crying of newborn puppies. The mother dog had disappeared into the depths of the structure, the rope pulling taut as she moved deeper into the building. Jake had to crouch low to squeeze through the gap in the wall, feeling the jagged edges of torn metal scraping against his parka. Once inside, the wind's fury was somewhat diminished, but the cold remained a living, malevolent presence. His breath came out in great clouds of vapor that froze instantly in the air. "I'm coming, girl," Jake called out, his voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "Keep making noise so I can find you." As if understanding his words, the dog barked, a hoarse, exhausted sound that tugged at Jake's heart. He followed the sound and the gentle pull of the rope, navigating carefully through the debris-strewn floor. His flashlight revealed graffiti on the walls, old oil stains on the concrete, and evidence that homeless individuals had used this space as shelter. Empty food cans, torn blankets, and cardboard boxes were scattered throughout the building. Jake's police training kicked in as he scanned his surroundings. This had been some kind of manufacturing plant, abandoned probably a decade ago. The town council had been talking about demolishing it for years, but budget constraints had kept it standing, a dangerous, forgotten relic slowly being reclaimed by the elements. In summer, it might be merely hazardous. In this cold, it was a death trap. The crying grew louder. Jake moved faster now, his urgency overriding his caution. He rounded a corner formed by a collapsed section of roof and stopped dead in his tracks. His flashlight illuminated a scene that would be seared into his memory forever. In a corner of the building, someone had created a makeshift shelter. Cardboard boxes had been arranged to form walls against the wind. Old blankets, threadbare and filthy, were piled to create a nest. And in the center of that pitiful nest, barely visible in the dim light, were 4 tiny shapes. The mother dog was already there, her body curled protectively around her bobbies, licking them frantically, trying to warm them with her own hypothermic body. Jake dropped to his knees beside them, his hands shaking as he pulled off one glove to check the puppies. They were so small, no more than 3 weeks old, their eyes barely open. Their tiny bodies were cold to the touch, far too cold. One of them wasn't moving at all. Another twitched weakly when Jake's finger touched its side. The other 2 were crying, but their cries were getting weaker by the second. "Oh God," Jake whispered. "How long have you been out here, girl?" The mother dog looked up at him with eyes that held both hope and heartbreak. She whined softly, nudging the smallest puppy toward Jake with her nose. It was as if she was saying, "This one first. Please save this one first." Jake's training as a wilderness first responder kicked in. Hypothermia. These puppies were in the advanced stages of hypothermia. Their body temperatures would be dangerously low. Their heart rates would be depressed. Without immediate intervention, they would die within minutes. The mother dog wasn't much better off. She was shaking violently, a sign of severe cold stress. He grabbed his radio with numb fingers. "To any unit. I need emergency veterinary assistance at the old industrial site. I have 5 canines in critical condition, 4 puppies and 1 adult female, all suffering from severe hypothermia and exposure. I also need," he paused, looking around at the evidence of long-term habitation in this corner. "I may need additional services. This looks like it's been someone's home." The radio crackled back immediately. "Jake, what the hell are you doing at Industrial? That building is condemned." "Saving lives," Jake replied tersely. "I need doctor here as soon as this storm breaks, and I need her to bring everything she's got for hypothermia treatment. These animals are minutes from death." "Copy that. Doctor is being, but Jake, you need to get those animals warm now. You can't wait for the storm to pass." Jake knew his colleague was right. He looked at the mother dog, at her puppies, and made a split-second decision. "I'm bringing them back to the cabin, all of them." He immediately began working with practiced efficiency. From his emergency pack, he pulled out the thermal blankets, thin sheets of metallic material designed to reflect body heat. He carefully wrapped each puppy in its own blanket, checking as he did so for signs of life. The largest puppy, a little male with distinctive brown markings, was the strongest. The second largest, a female, was responsive. The third puppy, another male, was barely breathing. And the smallest one, a tiny female who couldn't have weighed more than a pound, wasn't moving at all. Jake refused to give up on any of them. He tucked all 4 puppies inside his parka against his chest. Hopping his body heat would help stabilize them. They felt like ice cubes against his skin. He pulled out more chemical hand warmers from his pack, activating them, and carefully placing them in the makeshift pouch he'd created with his inner layers. The mother dog watched his every movement with intense focus. When Jake reached for her, she flinched slightly but didn't pull away. He wrapped her in the largest thermal blanket, then did something that surprised even himself. He pulled out his emergency rope and created a makeshift harness, securing it gently around her body in a way that wouldn't restrict her breathing but would allow him to carry her if necessary. "I know you walked all this way to find me," Jake said softly, looking into those intelligent, exhausted eyes. "But you've done your job, Mama. You found help. Now let me take care of you and your bobbies. Can you trust me to do that?" The dog's response was to lean her head against Jake's leg and close her eyes. It was an act of complete surrender, of absolute trust. This animal who had fought so hard, who had made an impossible journey through deadly conditions, who had refused to give up even when all hope seemed lost, she was finally allowing herself to stop fighting. Jake stood carefully, the puppies secure against his chest, the mother dog's makeshift harness in one hand, his flashlight in the other. The journey back was going to be even more dangerous than the journey here. He was carrying precious cargo now, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. As he turned to leave, his flashlight beam fell on something that made him pause. Tucked in the corner of the shelter was an old military jacket, United States Marine Corps, the patches still visible despite the wear. Next to it was a dog collar with tags. Jake bent down awkwardly and picked up the tags with his free hand. The name engraved on the metal made his throat tight. "Aurora, if found, please return to service dog. Do not separate." Jake looked at the mother dog, at Aurora, with new understanding. She wasn't just any stray. She had been someone's service dog, and somewhere in this building or this town, there was a man named who was probably desperate to find her. "Aurora," Jake said softly. "That's your name, girl. Don't worry. We're going to find, but first we're getting your bobbies to safety." Aurora's tail made the slightest wag, barely a movement, but enough to tell Jake she'd heard her name, that some part of her still had the strength to respond. With the puppies warm against his chest and Aurora secured to his side, Jake turned toward the gap in the wall and began the most important journey of his life. The return journey was a nightmare that seemed to stretch into eternity. Jake stepped back into the howling blizzard with 4 freezing puppies pressed against his chest and their exhausted mother struggling beside him. The wind hit with renewed fury, as if nature itself was trying to prevent their escape. Within seconds, Jake lost all sense of direction. The world became nothing but white chaos and bitter cold. Aurora stumbled after only a few steps, her legs finally giving out from exhaustion and hypothermia. Jake had no choice. He couldn't drag her through the snow. He bent down, grunting with effort, and lifted her into his arms. She was heavier than he'd expected, even malnourished as she clearly was. Now he was carrying roughly 60 pounds of dog in addition to the puppies tucked inside his coat, all while trudging through knee-deep snow in conditions that could kill in minutes. "Stay with me, girl," Jake panted, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Your bobbies need you. We're not giving up now." Inside his coat, the puppies had gone silent. Jake's heart clenched with fear. Silence from hypothermic victims was never a good sign. It meant they were slipping deeper into unconsciousness. He pressed his hand against them through the fabric, desperately trying to feel movement, heartbeats, any sign of life. The smallest one, the one who hadn't been moving when he found them, shifted slightly against his skin. It was the tiniest movement, but it sent a surge of hope through Jake's exhausted body. She was still alive. They were all still alive. He just had to get them to warmth before it was too late. Jake's legs burned with every step. His arms screamed in protest at Aurora's weight. The cold was seeping through his layers now, finding its way past even his heavy-duty gear. His goggles had frosted over, forcing him to push them up despite the painful sting of ice crystals against his eyes. He had no idea if he was heading in the right direction. In this whiteout, he could be walking in circles. Then, through the storm, Jake saw it. A faint glow that could only be the lights of his cabin. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that tears froze instantly on his cheeks. He pushed forward with renewed energy, fighting through the final 100 yards like a man possessed. He burst through the cabin door in an explosion of snow and wind, immediately kicking it shut behind him. The warmth inside hit him like a physical wave. Jake's fingers were so numb he nearly dropped Aurora as he lowered her gently to the floor. She collapsed immediately, too weak to even lift her head. "Radio, need radio," Jake shouted to himself, his words slurred from cold and exhaustion. He fumbled for the device with fingers that felt like frozen clubs. "To base. I'm back at the cabin with 5 critical patients. I need doctor here now. And I need officer with the emergency transport vehicle. These animals won't survive another hour without professional care." The response was immediate. "Jake, thank God, doctor is already on her way with officer, ETA 15 minutes. What do you need?" "Everything," Jake gasped. "Warming protocols for severe hypothermia, IV fluids if she can manage it, oxygen. These are newborn puppies, 3, maybe 4 weeks old max. One might already be," his voice broke. "We might lose one." "Understood. Doctor says to begin slow warming immediately. Not too fast or you'll shock their systems. Do you have heating pads?" "Negative. I've got the wood stove, thermal blankets and chemical warmers." "That'll have to do. Get those animals near the stove but not too close. Slow and steady. Doctor says the puppies should be skin to skin with a warm body if possible. And Jake, she says to check their gums. If they're white or blue, that's critical." Jake was already moving, his training overriding his exhaustion. He dragged his sleeping bag close to the wood stove, not too close, maybe 6 feet away where the warmth was strong but not overwhelming. He laid Aurora on the sleeping bag first, and she whined softly, her body shaking so violently she could barely control her movements. Then with trembling hands, Jake opened his coat and carefully extracted each puppy. They were barely moving, their tiny bodies limp and cold. He checked their gums as instructed. The largest male's gums were pale pink, not great but not critical. The second puppy, a female, had slightly bluer gums. The third male's gums were definitely blue. And the smallest female, the one Jake had mentally named Miracle because she'd somehow survived this long, her gums were almost white. "Come on, Bobbies," Jake whispered, tears streaming down his face now. "You didn't survive all of this just to give up now. Your mama didn't walk through hell just to lose you." He placed all 4 puppies against Aurora's belly, helping their mother curl around them. Then he grabbed every blanket in the cabin and covered them carefully, creating a warm nest. He activated more chemical hand warmers and tucked them strategically into the blankets, warm, but not hot enough to burn. He filled water bottles with warm water from his kettle and placed them around the puppies. Aurora lifted her head slightly and began licking her bobbies with what little strength she had left. Her maternal instinct was so strong that even in her own critical condition, her children came first. Jake watched, his heart breaking and swelling simultaneously. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jake kept checking the puppies, looking for any signs of improvement. The largest male puppy suddenly squeaked, a tiny sound but the first vocalization since they'd returned. Jake's heart leaped. "That's it, come on little guy, fight." The second puppy twitched, then the third, but Miracle remained ominously still, her tiny chest barely rising and falling. Jake gently picked her up, tucking her inside his still-warm thermal shirt against his bare chest. His body heat might be her only chance. "Please," Jake found himself praying to whoever might be listening. "Please let them all make it. Their mother did everything right. She fought so hard. Don't let it be for nothing." As if in answer to his prayer, he felt the tiniest movement against his chest. Miracle was twitching. Then, incredibly, she let out a squeak so small it was barely audible, but to Jake, it sounded like a symphony. Headlights suddenly flooded through the cabin windows. Jake heard the roar of an engine, doors slamming, voices shouting against the wind. The door burst open and Officer Sarah stumbled in, followed immediately by Doctor carrying what looked like 2 large medical bags. Doctor was a woman in her 50s, with iron-gray hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent 30 years treating animals in one of the harshest environments on Earth. She took one look at the scene, Jake holding a puppy against his chest, Aurora and her other bobbies huddled in blankets by the stove, and immediately started barking orders. Sarah set up the warming station by the table. "Jake, give me that puppy. Gently now. I need to check vitals on all of them, and we're starting IV fluids on Mama immediately. This is going to be touch and go for the next few hours." Jake carefully handed over Miracle, watching as doctors' experienced hands began their work. Officer was already setting up equipment, portable heating pads, medical supplies, oxygen tanks modified for small animals. "Doc," Jake said, his voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion, "are they going to make it?" Doctor looked up, her eyes meeting his. What he saw there was honest and direct. She wouldn't give him false hope, but she wouldn't give up either. "I don't know, Jake, but I promise you this. I'm going to fight like hell to save every one of them. Now sit down before you fall down. Sarah, get this man some hot coffee. He looks like he's about to collapse." Jake sank into a chair, suddenly aware of how much his body hurt. But he couldn't take his eyes off Aurora and her puppies. The mother dog was watching Doctor work on her bobbies, her eyes filled with trust and exhaustion. "You did good, girl," Jake whispered. "You found help, now let us help you." Aurora's tail made the smallest wag before she laid her head down and closed her eyes. And for the first time in what must have been days, she allowed herself to sleep, trusting that someone else would keep her bobbies safe. The cabin transformed into an emergency veterinary hospital within minutes. Doctor worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon, her hands moving with practiced precision as she assessed each puppy. Officer Sarah assisted, following orders with military efficiency. Jake sat wrapped in blankets, sipping hot coffee that burned his throat, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before him. "This one's core temperature is 89 degrees, Doctor announced, holding up the largest male puppy. "That's critical hypothermia. We need to warm him slowly, no more than 1 degree per hour, or we risk cardiac arrest." She placed the puppy on a heating pad set to low, covering him with a special thermal blanket. "Sarah, monitor his breathing. Count respirations every 5 minutes." The second puppy, the female, was in similar condition. The third male was worse, his body temperature barely registering at 86 degrees. But it was Miracle, the smallest female, who had Doctor most concerned. "Her temp is 84 degrees, the veterinarian said quietly, meeting Jake's eyes. "That's profound hypothermia. At this level, the body starts shutting down non-essential functions. Her heart rate is dangerously low, maybe 40 beats per minute when it should be over 200 for a puppy this age." "But she squeaked," Jake said desperately. "I felt her move, she's still fighting." Doctor's stern expression softened slightly. "Yes, she is. And that's what's going to save her if anything can. She's got fight in her, just like her mother." She gently placed Miracle on a separate heating pad, positioning her carefully. "I'm going to start subcutaneous fluids on all of them. They're severely dehydrated on top of everything else." While Doctor worked on the puppies, Sarah turned her attention to Aurora. The mother dog was conscious but weak, her breathing shallow and rapid. Sarah carefully inserted an IV catheter into Aurora's front leg, a difficult procedure that the exhausted dog bore without resistance, as if she understood they were trying to help. "Good girl, Aurora," Sarah murmured. "You're so brave, just rest now. We've got your bobbies." "Wait, you know her name?" Jake asked, surprised. Sarah looked up, equally surprised. "You didn't tell us. I found her tags in the pocket of that Marine Corps jacket you brought back. Aurora. Service dog registered too." She paused, her expression growing troubled. "Jake, I ran the name through our system while we were driving here. Was a homeless veteran who died 2 weeks ago. Heart attack. His body was found behind the old warehouse on 4th Street. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the wood stove and the soft whimpering of puppies. Jake felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Aurora hadn't just been lost or abandoned. She'd lost her human, her purpose, her companion, her entire world, and she'd been pregnant when it happened. She gave birth alone, Jake said softly, the pieces falling into place. After died, she was alone and pregnant. She found that abandoned building and gave birth to 4 puppies with no one to help her. She's been taking care of them by herself for weeks. Doctor paused in her work, her eyes glistening with tears. She quickly blinked away. And when the blizzard hit, when she knew her bobbies were going to freeze to death, she made a choice. She left her dying puppies to find help. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Most animals won't leave their young, even to save them. But Aurora understood that humans could help. She remembered that police station, remembered that it represented safety and assistance. She made a cognitive leap that most dogs simply aren't capable of. She's not most dogs, Jake said, watching Aurora's chest rise and fall with labored breaths. She was trained as a service dog. She's been working with humans, reading human behavior, understanding human society. When she needed help, she went to the one place she knew she could find it. Over the next 3 hours, the cabin became a theater of small miracles. The largest male puppy, whom Sarah had nicknamed Valor, was the first to show significant improvement. His body temperature climbed steadily, and he began squirming and squeaking with more energy. By 5 a.m., he was actively nursing from Aurora, his tiny tail wagging. The second puppy, named Hope by Jake, responded almost as quickly. Her gums went from blue-gray to healthy pink within 2 hours. She snuggled against her mother, her small body finally warm and safe. The third male, called Faith, took longer. His temperature climbed more slowly, and twice his breathing became so shallow that doctor had to stimulate him to keep him going. But gradually, agonizingly, he stabilized. By 6 a.m., he too was nursing, though weakly. But Miracle remained the critical case. Her temperature climbed with excruciating slowness: 84 degrees, then 85, then 86. Each single degree took nearly an hour. Her heart rate remained dangerously low. Doctor administered medications to support her cardiovascular system, gave her supplemental oxygen through a tiny mask, and never stopped monitoring her vital signs. "Come on, Miracle," Jake found himself whispering over and over. "Your mama didn't walk through that storm for nothing. Your brothers and sister need you. Fight, little one, fight." At 6:47 a.m., just as the first gray light of dawn began filtering through the cabin windows, something changed. Miracle's heart rate suddenly increased 50 beats per minute, then 60, then 80. Her breathing strengthened. She let out a squeak that was stronger than any sound she'd made before. Doctor checked her temperature and actually smiled, a rare expression on her usually stoic face. 87 degrees. She's turned the corner, I actually think she's going to make it. The cabin erupted in exhausted cheers. Sarah was crying openly now. Jake found himself laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by relief and emotion. Even Doctor wiped at her eyes before returning to her professional demeanor. Aurora, who had been watching everything with concerned eyes, seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. Her tail began to wag slowly at first, then with more energy. She lifted her head and looked directly at Jake, and in that moment he swore he saw gratitude in those intelligent brown eyes. By 8 a.m., all 4 puppies were stable, warm, and nursing. Aurora's temperature had normalized, and though she was still weak from malnutrition and exhaustion, Doctor declared her out of immediate danger. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world covered in pristine white snow and bathed in the soft light of a winter sunrise. Sarah stood at the window, her phone pressed to her ear. She'd been making calls for the past half hour, and now she turned to Jake with an odd expression on her face. "Jake, you need to see this." The local news picked up the story from our emergency radio traffic. Someone posted about it on social media, and it's going viral. We're getting calls from news stations, from rescue organizations, from people wanting to help. There's already a Facebook post with 50,000 shares. Jake blinked in surprise. What, how? Sarah showed him her phone. The screen displayed a post with photos. Someone had taken pictures of Jake carrying Aurora through the snow, probably a resident who'd seen him during the rescue. The caption read, "Alaska police officer risks his life in deadly blizzard to save mother dog and her puppies. This is what heroes look like." The comments were flooding in by the hundreds. People from around the world were sharing the story, expressing amazement at Aurora's intelligence and Jake's bravery. Offers of adoption, donations, and support were pouring in faster than Sarah could read them. "This is bigger than us now," Doctor said quietly, cradling Miracle in her experienced hands. "This story is going to touch people. It already is." Jake looked at Aurora, at her 4 puppies nestled against her warm body, all of them finally safe and alive. He thought about the impossible journey that had brought them all to this moment. A mother's desperate love, a split-second decision to follow a dog into a storm, and the razor-thin margin between life and death that they'd all somehow survived. "Good," Jake said simply. "Let the world know about her. Let them know what love looks like. Let them know that sometimes the greatest courage comes on 4 legs and that miracles still happen, even in the coldest, darkest nights." Outside, the sun climbed higher in a crystal-clear sky, painting the frozen landscape in shades of gold and pink. Inside the cabin, 5 dogs slept peacefully, surrounded by the humans who had refused to let them die. And somewhere in the digital world, Aurora's story was spreading like wildfire, touching hearts and reminding people of the extraordinary bond between humans and the animals who trust us with their lives. By noon, the tiny police outpost had become the center of a media firestorm. Jake stood at the window, coffee cup in hand, watching in disbelief as 3 news vans navigated the snow-cleared roads toward his cabin. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since 9 a.m. The department's main line had crashed from the volume of calls. And social media. Well, social media had exploded beyond anything Jake could have imagined. "Officer, you have another call from Good Morning America," Sarah announced, holding up her phone with an exhausted expression. "That's the 3rd time. CNN called twice. NBC, ABC, Fox News, they all want exclusive interviews. And there's a producer from some Netflix documentary series who says she's flying in from Los Angeles tonight." Jake shook his head in bewilderment. "This is insane. I followed a dog. Anyone would have done the same thing." "That's where you're wrong," Doctor said from her position beside Aurora and the puppies. She'd refused to leave them, spending the entire morning monitoring their recovery. Most people would have closed that door. Most people would have waited for the storm to pass. You risked your life, and that mother dog knew exactly who to ask for help. That combination, her intelligence and your courage, that's what's capturing hearts around the world. As if to prove her point, Sarah scrolled through her phone and began reading comments aloud. "I'm crying at my desk at work. This restored my faith in humanity. That dog is smarter than most people I know. I would die for Aurora and her puppies." Jake, there are literally millions of people following this story now. The hashtag Aurora the Miracle Mom is trending #1 worldwide. Jake moved back to where Aurora rested, kneeling beside her. The mother dog looked dramatically better than she had 12 hours ago. Her eyes were bright and alert. Her coat was drying and fluffing up, revealing the beautiful tan and black coloring beneath the grime. Most importantly, all 4 puppies were nursing vigorously, their tiny tails wagging as they fed. Aurora looked up at Jake and, in a gesture that made his throat tight with emotion, she gently licked his hand. It was a simple thank you, but it meant everything. "You're welcome, girl," Jake whispered. "You saved them, I just helped." The first news crew arrived at 1 p.m. A reporter named Melissa from the Anchorage NBC affiliate, accompanied by a cameraman whose equipment seemed excessive for such a small story. But as Melissa began setting up, Jake realized this wasn't going to be a small local news segment. Officer, our station has received over 10,000 emails about Aurora in the past 4 hours, Melissa explained, her professional demeanor barely concealing her own emotional investment in the story. People want to know everything. How are the puppies? How is Aurora? What's going to happen to them? Are you keeping her? Can people donate? The public response is unprecedented. Jake agreed to a brief interview, with the stipulation that they had to be quiet and respectful around the recovering animals. As the camera rolled, he told Aurora's story, from the mysterious knocking to the desperate journey through the blizzard to the agonizing night of medical care. He showed the Marine Corps jacket with its name and explained how Aurora had lost her human and fought to save her puppies alone. By the time he finished, both Melissa and her cameraman were wiping tears from their eyes. That's the most incredible story I've covered in 15 years of journalism, Melissa said, her voice thick with emotion. Officer, what would you say to people who are watching this and want to help? Jake thought for a moment, looking at Aurora and her puppies. I'd say that Aurora represents all the animals out there who need help, the strays, the abandoned, the forgotten ones. She was lucky. She found me. But there are thousands of animals who aren't so lucky. If people want to help, donate to your local animal shelter. Volunteer. Adopt instead of shop. And if you see a homeless person with a pet, remember that animal might be the only family they have. Died alone, but Aurora loved him until the end. That's worth something. The interview aired at 5 p.m. on the local news and was immediately picked up by national networks. By 6 p.m., it had been viewed online over 2 million times. By 8 p.m., that number had climbed to 10 million. The story resonated with something deep in the human psyche, the bond between species, the power of maternal love, the courage to ask for help, and the compassion to give it. But with the viral attention came unexpected complications. Jake's phone rang at 8:47 p.m. with a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was tearful and shaking. Officer, my name is Jennifer, was my father. Jake's heart stopped. He stepped outside into the cold night air, needing privacy for this conversation. Ms., I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father's dog, Aurora, she's amazing. She saved her puppies because of the training and love he gave her. I know, Jennifer sobbed. I just watched the news. I can't believe it's really her. My father and I, we were estranged. I hadn't spoken to him in 5 years. I didn't even know he was homeless. I didn't know he'd died until the police called me last week and I was too ashamed to claim his body right away. I'm a terrible daughter, but Aurora, she was with him. She loved him when I didn't. Ms. Jennifer, you need to know something, Jake said gently. Your father trained Aurora to be extraordinary. The fact that she knew to seek help, that she understood human society well enough to find a police station in a blizzard, that speaks to the time and love invested in her. He raised an incredible animal. That's his legacy. There was silence on the line, broken only by Jennifer's quiet crying. Then she spoke, her voice stronger. Officer, I want to do something. I want to honor my father's memory. Those donations people are offering. What if we created a foundation? Something to help other veterans and their pets. Something that makes sure no other service animal ends up alone like Aurora did. Jake felt something shift in his chest, a sense that Aurora's story was growing into something bigger than any of them had anticipated. I think that's a beautiful idea. Let's make it happen. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, something else remarkable was occurring. Doctor had opened her laptop to check some medical references and discovered that Aurora's story had reached the scientific community. Emails were flooding in from animal behaviorists, cognitive scientists, and researchers studying animal intelligence. Listen to this, she called out to Sarah. Dr. Hare from Duke University's Canine Cognition Center wants to study Aurora. He says her ability to seek human help for her offspring represents a level of cognitive sophistication and understanding of human social structures that's rarely documented. And get this, National Geographic wants to feature her in their next issue on animal intelligence. Sarah looked up from her phone, where she'd been managing the tsunami of adoption requests for the puppies. That's not even the craziest thing. A children's book publisher wants to write Aurora's story. Disney reached out about a potential movie, and there's a billionaire in California who offered to donate $1 million toward building a shelter in Aurora's name. $1 million, Jake said, stepping back inside and closing the door against the cold. For a dog rescue. For what she represents, Doctor corrected. Hope, courage, the unbreakable bond between mothers and their children, intelligence and compassion crossing species barriers. Aurora isn't just a dog anymore, Jake. She's become a symbol. As if sensing she was being discussed, Aurora lifted her head from where she rested with her puppies. Her 4 bobbies were sound asleep, their tiny bellies full, their bodies warm and safe. She looked around the room at the humans who had saved her family, and her tail began to wag, not frantically but with slow, deliberate happiness. Jake crossed the room and knelt beside her, gently stroking her head. "What do you think, girl? Ready to be famous?" Aurora responded by licking his face, then carefully adjusting her position to better shelter her sleeping puppies. Fame meant nothing to her. All that mattered was that her bobbies were safe, warm, and alive. She had done what every mother dreams of doing. She had saved her children against impossible odds. Outside, the First News van was setting up for a live morning broadcast. Inside, 5 dogs slept peacefully while 3 humans worked late into the night, answering emails, coordinating donations, and beginning to build something that would honor not just Aurora's courage, but every animal who had ever needed help and every human who had ever cared enough to give it. The story of a mother dog who knocked on a door in a blizzard was becoming a movement. And it was only just beginning. 3 weeks after that frozen night, Jake stood in the cramped police station conference room, facing a decision that would change multiple lives forever. Around the table sat Jennifer, Dr. Sarah, and a lawyer named David who specialized in animal welfare law. Between them lay documents that would determine Aurora's future and the future of her 4 puppies. The recovery period had been remarkable. All 4 puppies had not only survived but thrived. Valor, the largest male, had grown bold and adventurous, constantly exploring every corner of Jake's cabin. Hope, the female with distinctive white paws, was gentle and affectionate, always the first to greet visitors. Faith, the 3rd puppy, had overcome his rough start to become the most playful of the group. And Miracle, tiny Miracle who had nearly died. She had grown into a spirited little fighter who refused to be left behind by her larger siblings. Aurora had transformed from a half-frozen, desperate mother into a magnificent example of her breed. Her coat gleamed with health. Her eyes sparkled with intelligence. She had gained back the weight she'd lost and more. But what struck everyone who met her was the depth of awareness in those brown eyes, an almost human understanding of what had happened and what was happening now. The problem was that everyone wanted her. "We've received over 40,000 adoption applications," Sarah said, shuffling through stacks of papers. "From every state and 12 different countries. Celebrities, politicians, families, individuals, everyone wants to adopt Aurora or one of the puppies." "The donation fund has reached $1.7 million, David added, adjusting his glasses. "That's enough to establish the Aurora Foundation permanently. We can help hundreds of veterans and their pets, but we need to make some decisions about Aurora and the puppies first. The public is invested in their story. Whatever we decide will be scrutinized." Jennifer looked exhausted. She'd flown to Alaska the day after their phone call and had barely left since. The guilt of her estrangement from her father had driven her to pour everything into honoring his memory through Aurora. But now, sitting in this meeting, she looked torn. "I want to adopt Aurora," Jennifer said quietly. "She was my father's dog, she should be with family, but..." Her voice cracked. "I live in a small Seattle apartment. I work 60 hours a week. I travel for my job. I don't know if I can give her what she needs, and there's something else." She looked at Jake. "Aurora has bonded with you. Anyone can see it. When you walk into a room, her whole body lights up. You saved her bobbies. In her mind, you're packed now. Jake had been dreading this conversation. Over the past 3 weeks, Aurora had become part of his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. She followed him everywhere. She slept beside his bed. When he worked, she rested her head on his knee. And the puppies, they had woven themselves into his heart with their tiny paws and innocent trust. But Jake lived alone in a remote cabin. His job was demanding and sometimes dangerous. Was that really the right environment for Aurora and potentially 4 puppies? There's another consideration, Doctor interjected. Aurora is a trained service dog, a very good one based on her behavior. Jake, you've told me about some of the things you've been experiencing since that night. The nightmares, the anxiety, the flashbacks to carrying those puppies through the storm. You nearly died that night. You're experiencing trauma symptoms. Jake shifted uncomfortably. He hated admitting weakness. It's nothing I can't handle. Maybe not, Doctor continued gently. But Aurora could help. She's already helping. I've watched her respond to your stress cues. She's still doing what trained her to do. She's still a service dog looking for someone to serve. You need her as much as she needs you. The room fell silent. Jake looked down at his hands, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. Then he felt something warm and soft press against his leg. Aurora had somehow slipped into the conference room. Probably Sarah had let her in. The dog sat beside Jake's chair, leaning against him, her eyes fixed on his face with that uncanny understanding. The puppies are a different question, David said, breaking the silence. We need to find them homes where they'll be loved, safe, and where Aurora can potentially maintain contact. Research shows that dogs do form lasting bonds with their offspring. Separating them completely could cause distress. I have a proposal, Sarah said suddenly. What if we keep them local? There are 4 families here in Alaska who applied, all thoroughly vetted, all exceptional candidates. The Hendersons lost their dog last year to cancer. They have 2 children who've been begging for a puppy. The family runs a small farm and has experience with working dogs. And Maria Santos is a retired school teacher who specifically requested Miracle because her own daughter survived cancer and the story resonated with her. If they stay local, Aurora could see them, Jennifer said, hope lighting her eyes. We could arrange regular or visits. And there's precedent for this, David added. There are documented cases of mother dogs maintaining relationships with their grown puppies, especially when they live in proximity. It's actually considered beneficial for the puppy's socialization and emotional development. Jake felt Aurora's weight against his leg, steady and warm. He thought about the past 3 weeks, waking up to puppy squeaks, watching Aurora teach her bobbies how to play, seeing the joy in her eyes when all 4 puppies piled on top of her. He thought about the nightmares that had plagued him since that frozen night, and how Aurora seemed to know when they hit, always there in the darkness to ground him back to reality. I want to adopt Aurora, Jake heard himself say. The words came from somewhere deep inside, a place of certainty he hadn't known existed. If Jennifer approves, Aurora should have a choice in this, but she's already made it clear. She's chosen to stay with me, and his voice roughened with emotion, I need her too. I didn't realize how much until right now. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. My father would be so happy. He always said Aurora had a gift for finding the people who needed her most. You saved her bobbies, Jake. You risked everything for them. Of course she chose you. Of course you should be together. And the puppies, Sarah pressed gently. Jake looked at Aurora, and in that mysterious way that sometimes happens between humans and dogs, he felt like they communicated without words. He could almost hear her thoughts. My bobbies will be safe. They will be loved. And I can see them grow. This is what I want. Local adoption, Jake decided. We interview all 4 families personally. Aurora meets them. We make sure it's right. And we set up a schedule. Maybe once a month the puppies come back for a reunion. They can play together and Aurora can see that they're thriving. There's one more thing, Jennifer said, pulling out a small box. Inside was a new collar, deep blue with silver tags. Engraved on the tags was Aurora Service Dog Handler Jake on the second tag, in memory of USMC, a hero who raised a hero. Jennifer's hands shook as she held it out. I had this made. My father would want Aurora to keep serving, to keep helping. She saved her puppies. Now she can help you. That's what service dogs do. They save lives over and over again. Jake took the collar with trembling hands. He knelt beside Aurora and gently removed her old, worn collar, the one had given her. Jennifer carefully placed it in a clear case, promising to keep it safe as a memorial. Then Jake fastened the new collar around Aurora's neck. The moment it was secure, something shifted in Aurora's demeanor. She sat more alert. The service dog training that had been dormant during her pregnancy and recovery came flooding back. She looked at Jake with renewed purpose, as if to say, I have a job again. I have a person to protect. I am home. It's settled then, David said, making notes. Jake adopts Aurora. We select 4 local families for the puppies with visitation agreements. The foundation money goes toward helping veterans and their pets, with Jennifer as executive director and Doctor as veterinary advisor. And Jake, Sarah added with a grin, you're going to be the foundation's spokesperson. Like it or not, you and Aurora are the faces of this movement now. Jake groaned, but he was smiling. Aurora leaned harder against him, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of completeness. He had saved Aurora and her puppies that frozen night. But sitting here now, with her steady presence beside him, Jake realized the truth. She had saved him right back. 6 months later, on a brilliant August afternoon, Jake stood in a place that hadn't existed before Aurora knocked on his door. The Aurora Memorial Garden occupied the exact spot where that abandoned industrial building once stood, the place where Aurora had given birth, where she had fought to keep her bobbies alive, where desperation had driven her to make an impossible choice. The condemned building was gone now, replaced by something beautiful. Local craftsmen had built a small amphitheater with benches arranged in a semicircle. Native Alaskan plants, hardy wildflowers, resilient shrubs and dwarf birch trees created splashes of color against the carefully maintained grounds. And at the center of it all stood a bronze statue that had brought tears to thousands of eyes since its unveiling 3 months ago. The sculptor had captured Aurora perfectly, her head lifted, eyes alert and intelligent, with 4 small puppies nestled at her feet. But it was the inscription on the granite base that made the memorial extraordinary. In memory of Aurora and USMC. She taught us that courage knows no species, that love can survive any storm, and that asking for help is the bravest thing anyone can do. Here, where she fought for her children, we remember that heroes sometimes walk on 4 legs. Today was special, the first annual Aurora Day celebration, an event that had drawn nearly 500 people to the small Alaskan town. News crews were present, but they were respectful, keeping their distance from the main ceremony. This day was for the community, for the families whose lives had been touched by one dog's incredible journey. Jake stood at the front of the gathering, Aurora sitting calmly at his side in her service dog vest. She'd become an integral part of his life, accompanying him on patrol, helping him through the PTSD episodes that still occasionally struck, and generally making his isolated existence feel less lonely. The nightmares had decreased. The anxiety had become manageable. Aurora had given him purpose beyond his job. She'd given him family. Before we begin, Jake said, his voice carrying across the garden, I want to introduce you to some very special guests. 4 families stepped forward, and from their arms tumbled 4 rambunctious 6-month-old puppies, no longer tiny and helpless, but vibrant young dogs full of energy and personality. Valor bounded ahead first, his handler Mark Henderson barely keeping up with the adventurous young male who'd already earned a reputation as the neighborhood explorer. He rushed to Aurora, and the mother dog's tail began wagging furiously as she sniffed and nuzzled her largest son. Hope pranced forward next, her distinctive white paws flashing as Emma, age 8, walked beside her with obvious pride. Hope had become a therapy dog in training, already visiting the local elementary school to help children overcome their fear of dogs. She pressed against Aurora's side, and mother and daughter touched noses in a gesture of pure affection. Faith came more cautiously, staying close to Isaiah, the teenager who trained him to help with farm chores. Faith had grown into a magnificent working dog, smart and dedicated. He approached Aurora respectfully, as if remembering that she was pack leader, and Aurora licked his face approvingly. And finally, Miracle, still the smallest but with a spirit that belied her size, practically dragged Maria Santos across the grass. Miracle had become something of a local celebrity herself, visiting cancer patients at the hospital where her small size and gentle nature brought comfort to those fighting their own battles. She squeaked excitedly as she reached Aurora, and the mother dog lay down so her smallest daughter could climb all over her, just like she had as a newborn. The crowd watched in awed silence as Aurora reunited with her children. Some people were crying. Some were recording the moment on their phones. Everyone understood they were witnessing something rare and precious, a family separated by necessity but reunited by love and community support. "This is why we're here," Jennifer said, stepping up to the microphone. Over the past 6 months, she transformed from a guilt-ridden daughter into a passionate advocate. The Aurora Foundation had already helped 73 veterans keep their pets, provided emergency veterinary care to dozens of animals, and established 3 other memorial gardens in cities across Alaska. My father lived on the streets, forgotten by society, abandoned by his family, including me. But he was never alone because he had Aurora. She gave him purpose. She gave him unconditional love. And when he died, she took everything he taught her and used it to save lives. Jennifer paused, wiping tears from her eyes. The foundation has received over $3 million in donations. We've expanded to 5 states. We've saved hundreds of animals and supported countless veterans. But more than that, we've changed the conversation. People see homeless individuals with pets differently now. They understand that bond. Aurora taught us that. Doctor spoke next, sharing statistics about animal intelligence and the documented cases of dogs understanding human social structures. Then Sarah talked about the increase in adoption rates and volunteer applications at local shelters. Every speaker reinforced the same message. One dog's courage had sparked a movement. But the most powerful moment came when they invited anyone who'd been touched by Aurora's story to share. An elderly veteran stood up, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I was planning to surrender my dog," he said, his voice shaking. "I'm on a fixed income. My dog needed surgery I couldn't afford. I thought giving him up was the kindest thing I could do. Then I heard about Aurora, about this foundation. They paid for the surgery. My dog is healthy now. But more than that, they reminded me that I'm not alone, that we matter, me and my dog both. Aurora saved my life without ever meeting me." Story after story poured out. A single mother who'd received help keeping her children's dog after a job loss. A young veteran with PTSD whose service dog had received emergency care through the foundation. A homeless woman whose cat, her only companion, had been treated for an injury. Each story was a ripple extending outward from that one frozen night when a desperate mother had knocked on a cabin door. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jake found himself standing alone at the bronze statue with Aurora at his side. The families had taken the puppies to the nearby park for a play session. The crowd had dispersed to the reception area. For just a moment, it was quiet. Jake placed his hand on Aurora's head, feeling the warmth of her fur, the steady rise and fall of her breathing. "Did you know?" he asked softly. "That night when you knocked on my door, did you know you were starting all of this?" Aurora looked up at him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, and Jake could swear she understood every word. She leaned against his leg, her weight solid and comforting, and together they looked at the statue of her greatest moment. "You know what the amazing thing is," Jake continued. "Everyone thinks I'm the hero of this story, but they're wrong. You're the hero, Aurora. You always were. You made the impossible choice. You walked through a blizzard that should have killed you. You trusted a stranger to save your bobbies. You refused to give up when any reasonable creature would have. That's courage. That's love. That's heroism." Aurora's tail wagged slowly and she made a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a bark. It sounded like contentment, like peace, like a mother who knew her children were safe and thriving, like a service dog who'd found her purpose again, like a survivor who'd not only endured but had changed the world in the process. In the distance, Jake could hear the sounds of the puppies playing, Valor's enthusiastic barking, Hope's happy yips, Faith's deeper woofs, and Miracle's excited squeaking. Those sounds, the sounds of life, of joy, of survival against impossible odds, were Aurora's legacy. Jake thought about a man he'd never met but felt he knew through Aurora's loyalty and training. "We did right by her," he whispered to the memory of a homeless veteran who'd loved his dog enough to train her to excellence. "Your girl saved lives. She's still saving lives. You'd be so proud." As if in answer, a warm breeze moved through the garden, carrying the scent of wildflowers and summer grass. Aurora lifted her head, nose twitching, and for just a moment Jake imagined she was scenting something, or someone, only she could perceive. Her tail wagged once, twice, 3 times. Then she settled back against Jake's leg with a contented sigh. The sun touched the horizon, casting long shadows across the memorial garden. In a few minutes, Jake would rejoin the celebration. Aurora would greet her puppies one more time before they went home with their families. There would be more speeches, more photos, more reminders of how one desperate night had transformed into something beautiful. But right now, in this quiet moment, Jake allowed himself to simply be grateful. Grateful for a dog's intelligence and courage. Grateful for a mother's unbreakable love. Grateful for the second chance Aurora had given him to be part of something larger than himself. "Come on, girl," Jake finally said, straightening up. "Let's go see your kids. They're probably wondering where their mama is." Aurora stood, stretched, and together they walked toward the sound of playing puppies and laughing families, toward life, toward hope, toward love that had survived the coldest, darkest night and emerged stronger than anyone could have imagined. And in the bronze statue behind them, frozen forever in metal, Aurora stood watch, a guardian, a mother, a hero who would inspire generations to come. Because some stories don't end. They ripple outward, touching lives in ways we can never fully measure. They remind us that courage comes in many forms, that love transcends species, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who simply refuse to give up. Aurora's story would live forever, in the foundation that bore her name, in the families reunited by her example, in the lives saved by the movement she'd inspired, and in the hearts of everyone who heard about a mother dog who knocked on a door in sea cold and changed the world.